Hello, my name is Ryan Dunning, and today I'd like to talk about my Capstone project, and specifically Task 5. In a brief overview, I'm going to talk about some core competency development, some business analysis, in which I partnered up with a local landscaping company to kind of dig in and understand some of the core dynamics and some of the issues that this landscape company was having and try to resolve them through the tasks and the topics learned throughout this course, as well as my own personal and professional development. Some core competency development that we're going to look at today that I encountered going through with this landscaping company are some real-world data-driven decisions, financial analysis, financial statement analysis, profit planning, budgeting, and a shared theory of leadership. Getting right to it, some of the things that I encountered with this particular company is that there were no records whatsoever. Everything was done via cell phone or by hand on a piece of paper. Everything was collected with cash at the time of the exchange of the service that was provided. Therefore, there was no need to write anything down. Luckily for me, I worked with one of my friends, and he was willing to work with me and put in those extra hours in order to create some of these things. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, some of these real-world data decisions were talking him into recording counts receivable and payable, as well as the day-to-day operational expenses, fixed and variable costs, and then we would later analyze some of the other competencies that would relate to that once we got there. More specifically, we were looking for break-even points. When was the appropriate time to buy new equipment? When the appropriate time would be to look at hiring additional staff, whether it be a lawn care technician or somebody to do additional clerical work. As far as business analysis, continuing the business analysis, as far as the overview of the financial statements, as I mentioned before, he was keeping no record of it either administratively or financially. This made it very difficult. I had to communicate with him and share with him the importance of these statements and recording every task and every decision that he made in order to go back and reflect and ultimately make the best decision for his business. We created replica statements for educational purposes, so I pulled a lot of the data sheets that we used throughout this course and showed him and walked him through step-by-step of why they're important, how to use them, and how they can easily be translated into his business. And then I ended up giving him his own sheets, and we launched day-to-day sheets for logging expenses. So we didn't really have to start from scratch, and he had a platform to go from at that point. Once we had those, I was able to sit down with him and we went over the financial statement analysis. I introduced some ratios of return on investment, return on equity, and return on assets, and the importance of why and how they calculate it out to show him either where his business was lacking or where it was really thriving. We computed the ratios, and then we identified where a lot of money was being made and money was being lost. Profit planning. Now, of course, we took into consideration fixed costs like equipment financing. So he had a trailer that was being financed, lawnmowers, weed whackers, things like that, along with the variable costs associated with the actual lawn care and the service that he was providing, such as fuel, weed whacker, string, blade sharpening, fertilizer, weed killer, things like that. And also, we were able to look. There was a change of season when we ran this analysis, and it was really easy to see how the weather impacted his income. Now, long term, we could have looked at the local economy and how the demand for his service would fluctuate throughout the year. However, we were only able to do this for about 2 months, so we never really saw the local economy shift. However, we were able to see some shifts in the weather patterns, or associated with the weather patterns. And budgeting. We tracked all of his expenses. We put it in a spreadsheet, and we were able to manipulate that spreadsheet to show him the positive and negative growth if you were to make certain decisions, such as buying additional equipment or hiring another staff member. Basically just some what-if analysis. So if he were not to buy a new lawnmower, a bigger lawnmower, we were able to sit down and kind of fine-tune what his necessities were at the time, and if the budget will allow it. And then lastly, some leadership theories. We had a couple incidents prior where he had mentioned that he hired some friends, and when I was actually able to see him hire his first technician, and he ended up letting him go because he wasn't able to keep up with quality. He wasn't providing quality service. And a lot of this had to do with the fact that he was never given any examples or expectations when he started. And therefore, it ended up hurting the owner as far as his income, as well as it also ended up costing the employee his job. So I had to sit down and talk to him about the importance of training, mentorship, and the things that as a boss you have to do in order to get the desired service quality that you would normally see on your own without trying, because not everybody runs things or would see things the way that he did, or have a different idea of what a good job looked like. So some obstacles. The owner was by far the biggest obstacle with this. As I mentioned before, he was a friend of mine, so you're already at a little bit of a disposition because it's not a formal relationship. However, when we sat down and I told him, I said, okay, for X amount of time, you're not my buddy, you're my boss, and I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna help you, and we're gonna do business talk, and then afterwards we'll be friends. So some of the issues that we had specifically with administrative support and the financial aspects of things, he struggled to understand the necessity for formal logging and administrative practices. So again, as I had mentioned before, we put together spreadsheets and documents and ways to log day-to-day operations. And once I was really able to sit down, it took multiple weeks for us to gather all this data, but once I was able to sit down and show him the difference in the growth, and he was able to point out some of the things that he didn't even realize that was happening. There was one account in particular that was losing him in a fairly substantial amount every month, and he didn't realize it, so we were able to make some adjustments to help profits there as well. And he also identified himself as a worker and not a desk jockey. Now, being a boy with a dirt boy, I'm a man with a dirt boy background, so I completely understand the difference in how difficult it is to shift from a manual labor type work to office clerical work. However, the necessity for him to make that switch was by far the biggest thing that his company needed for growth, because if he didn't do it, nobody else was going to do it, and he couldn't afford to hire somebody to do it for him. And as far as finance goes, just lack of documentation. It took weeks for us to gather the data. It was difficult to communicate, again, the importance, and really I was only able to track and base my predictions, my analysis off whatever he recorded. So if there were extra, if he had made more money than he told me he did, it was going to get logged incorrectly, or if he spent money without realizing it, or didn't, write something down, I wasn't following him closely enough to be able to nitpick and, log absolutely everything. So I was strictly going off the data that he was providing. Some of the strengths that I felt I demonstrated throughout this was my ability to communicate with him. I was surprisingly patient. As I mentioned before, he was a friend of mine, so it was hard not to go down that path. But I felt I did the best I could. And my ability to translate. So he has a high school diploma, and never took any real business classes, so it was hard for me to, I couldn't relate to him and say, oh, it was like this in chapter 7, because he never read chapter 7, so I had to break it down multiple levels and multiple tiers for him to actually understand what I mean when I say return on assets, return on equity, break-even points, so on and so forth. And my ability to persuade and influence. As I mentioned before, he was very resistant to the idea of doing business administrative clerical work, and I may have gotten him to the point when he saw, once he gave me the chance, he saw some of the returns, and I may have made a lasting impact, but only time will tell. As far as my personal and professional growth, significant lessons that I pulled away from this course as a whole, or rather this degree, is the accurately communicating business strategy. So even with my undergrad degree, there were times when I would think about something years prior to being formally educated. And then when you're sitting in a classroom, you have that eureka, that aha moment of, oh, I didn't know that was the word for that, but I've thought about this before. And I felt myself doing that a lot. There were times when, the break-even point. Didn't know that it was formally called the break-even point. And I know I keep going back to that, and I apologize, but it's something that keeps resonating with me. It used to just be the point when the initial investment pays off. It's very long and shortened up. And again, it's important to be able to translate to both, to speak to both educated and uneducated individuals in order to get your point across. Currently, I'm in the military. I'm a flight commander in the United States Air Force, and it's important that I'm able to communicate with my boss, who's been in the Air Force for 15 years in my career field, as well as that new airman that just came out of BMT, and still get the same desired result, or be able to translate what he wants all the way down to the lowest level. Inaccurate documentation. I've never been much for recording anything I do. I can't even count my calorie intake for the day. However, when you're running and operating a business, it's important, not only for the financial operations, but as well as human resources. Being able to track how much you're spending on people, as far as it's a salary, training, healthcare benefits, so on and so forth. It's really important that you log and monitor, and then go back and analyze every single amount of money that you spend. As far as my continued growth, on the 1st of January, I plan on starting a new course with the Masters of Science Leadership and Management program at WGU. I really enjoyed the self-paced portion of this degree, and I want to continue that. And I would really like to get a second one. I believe that leadership and management will help me in my career, as well as it gives me a little bit more time to pay off those bills. So, but the amount of knowledge and material that I gathered from this course, I want to continue that. This course in particular, it has sparked a desire to continue my learning, and I want to continue to do that as long as possible. As far as down the line, I'm not opposed to the idea of a PhD. However, I did submit a pilot package here in October, and I will know any day now if I get selected for a pilot slot. And if that's the case, I'm going to have to hold off, because that's a 2 to 4 year educational piece and training that I couldn't balance a PhD on top of pilot training as well. So, a brief summary of what we talked about. I talked about core competencies, business analysis and task 4, my own personal and professional development. Pending any questions, this concludes my briefing. Thank you.